last part to an answer to the question, when God the Son incarnated, did he lose some of his divine attributes? We talked about some of these divine attributes, omniscience, but if he's no longer omniscient, can he be God? And yet we read in Mark 13 that he didn't know the time of his return. We read in Luke 2 that he grew in wisdom and knowledge. How can this happen to God? And I hope you can see the struggles of Nestorius. Because Cyril of Alexandria said, no text in Scripture refers distinctly to one nature or the other. And Nestorius was harpooned for saying things like, that refers to his deity, and that refers to his humanity. But if we can establish the principle, as Joe was leading us into, that Christ is both man and God, and that as man he has certain faculties, certain limitations, then we can fit those Christological passages which reference limitations to his humanity. And we are not caught on the logic of Channing, the author of Unitarianism, who says, oh yeah, if Christ is God, then how come he doesn't know? If Christ is God, how can he get tired? How can he bleed? How can he die? And our caveat for that is that he did those things as man.
Isn't there a term for, is there a Greek word, and I have no idea, for stepping aside, stepping away from, stepping down from God?
Well,
I mean,
the Greek word that is a precipice for this is ekenosin, is empty. But if you will look at the Pauline usages of ekenosin, you'll see that he uses them metaphorically. Whereas ekenosin literally means empty. I empty the water from this cup. That's what kenosis means.
Well, but metaphorically, though, would imply we don't know or we can't understand because we don't live in the infinite.
See, part of the exegesis of Philippians 2:6, I really urge you to read Feinberg and N.T. Wright on Philippians 2:6, Fee 2, and Hawthorne. Part of the thing is, in Philippians 2:6, is that aorist verb has no object. It doesn't say that he emptied himself of anything. Rather, Feinberg and others argue that the participle Laban, and Cook too, my beloved prof at Western, argue that the participle Laban indicates the mode of this kenosis, because Laban means to take. How did he empty? By taking. So is there any pouring out of something? No, there's an addition of something. And the question is, what is this addition? Is it like Buswell says and Apollinaris says, a collection of attributes? Or is it like Hodge says, a thinking, feeling, acting entity? Not distinct from the one person, but distinct from the divinity. And I use divinity in the most deep of its connotations. And that brings us to the point that Jack was during the break bringing up to me, Jack, if any DE students, distance ed students are interested, is taking the doctrine of the Trinity by distance education. Very soon he'll probably wish he hadn't. Because there are no exams, neither is there a research paper. But there's a whole lot of thinking. Because Jack's assignment, first assignment, is to answer 40 questions, which I evasively and trickily and meanly ask on the text Cook and the charts by House, and also this book by House and Geisler. And we're not trying to sell books here. We're just saying that this is a good book. This book deals with the attributes of God, but it deals with the attributes of God most pointedly in the way one's views of these attributes interact with neo-theism or open theism. Open theism, of course, believes that God doesn't know everything. Neither is God entirely sovereign. I mean, he could be sovereign, and he could know, but he limits himself. That's open theism. Some pretty heavyweight guys are open theists. And if you were a subscriber to JETS, the Journal of Evangelical Theological Society, you would see a running battle between the classical view of God's attributes and the neo-theist view. And in fact, members of the Evangelical Theological Society were booted out because they were teaching that God is limited. And that battle is the battle for God, in the views of Norm Geisler, who I think is prez of Southern Evangelical Seminary, I think he is, and Wayne House. Dr. House and Dr. Geisler are buds, and they co-authored this book. And I wanted to, when we go into this, actually I think I'm ready for the next page. When we go into this page, and remember what we're doing is we're establishing the principle to correct Erickson's Christological canonicism by saying, these things, Dr. Erickson, you can put into his humanity. You don't have to put in his deity. You don't have to say, Dr. Erickson, that Christ, as God, didn't know the time of his return, because omniscience is a quality of God and is actually a criterion of God, according to Isaiah. What you can say, Dr. Erickson, is that Christ as a man didn't know, because Christ as a man had a man's mind. Christ as a man had a man's emotion. He had a man's will. If he didn't, how was he true man? How was he like his brethren? But when I move from this page and move into this page, then I get to the question. And I'm talking about the second level heading. Some experiences refer to one nature and some refer to the other. That's the opinion of Charles Hodge, St. Augustine, and John Calvin, and Wayne Grudem, and others. While I disagree with Grudem in one spot, I agree with him in the other spot. He can't be right always. Impassibility. And you read this chapter, right?
Yeah.
Impassibility is an attribute of God, according to Docks, House, and Geisler, and many others. That is, God cannot undergo passion or suffering. The divine nature cannot be caused to suffer from any external cause. That meant that when Christ was laid out on that cross, did you see the passion? And you see what's his face's hand holding our Lord's hand firmly against the wood of the cross, and driving the stud into his hands. And it means that when the soldiers pressed the crown of thorns on his head and slapped him on the cheek, then, like John of Damascus says, that wasn't God that felt the blow. Oh, it was a nature that is God, but it's not the divine nature. That's what they say. And they go on with one more sentence here. Oh, they go on a lot more than that, but I'll spare you. If I read so much, I don't have time to dazzle you with my own thinking. All suffering involves change in the sufferer, but God cannot change. Now remember, we forgot to add perfection to God's attributes, didn't we? That's my mistake. All suffering involves change in the sufferer, but God cannot change. So, Dr. House informs us, he cannot suffer. Neither can he learn something, because that would imply that he didn't know something, and that which is perfect cannot not know. So we have a choice. Either the deity in Christ is imperfect, or it's omniscient and perfect. But does deity suffer? Does deity die? Does deity bleed? Does deity grow? Does deity learn? Does deity get tired? That's their position. Now, curiously enough, my pal Dr. House can't apply that view because he believes in the eternal relational subordination of the Son too. We've had our go around. One thing about Dr. House, he is a humble man. I called Dr. House this old bag of flesh who had been away from the Lord so many years. Me, not him, not House. I had just finished my doctorate. You know how hard it is to find a position in the seminary? When one is an old flea bag who earns his doctorate when he's 65? I mean, what army would take me? What navy? The Marine Corps would take me for that stuffed dummy to drive the bayonet in, I suppose. I called Doc House and say, boy, would I like to be able to do something. And in that conversation where he bought me lunch, which was so hot, I blew smoke and fire because I went to that. He likes that. There's some place, Chinese food or something, and you go through there, doody-doo, and you have an empty plate, and you put it on. And you come to the sauce. Well, that looks good. Swab, swab, swab. And there I was, struggling with a burning stomach all the time. I was trying to impress him, but even there, we danced around a little bit with Christology. And he didn't say, I'm right because I'm Dr. House. I'm right because I'm an honored professor. I'm right because I wrote 30 books. He's a humble man. And he's expressed an opinion here. And I imagine Geisler is the same because they get along so well, as I understand. That some experiences refer to the divine nature, some refer to the human nature. Therefore, when it says, I don't know the time of my return, that's the human nature. And therefore, he didn't have to give up omniscience. Dr. Erickson. And when it says he's tired of Jacob's well, that doesn't mean that he had to give up omnipotence. If he did, who is holding the universe together? And it didn't mean that as God, he gave up sovereignty. Because obedience, in my humble opinion, occurs in the humanity. Then after that, we could dance around a little bit with some more exegesis. And we could say Philippians 2:6 shows nothing was lost. Ekenosen is used metaphorically. Labon defines the kenosis by taking humanity, the form of a servant. Hos anthropos is the mode in which limitations occur. As a man, it says in the text plainly, as a man, being found in the fashion as a man, he humbled himself and, aorist tense, became obedient. Now, your challenge, remember that those spy things where the guy would go into a phone booth. You're probably too young for that, I don't know. And he would get the phone and they would say, this is your assignment if you choose to accept it. You guys out there, what was that? What was that? And they would have some fantastic thing that they had to do. And so they played this music all the time, and the guys would be doing all these fantastic things to bring about, rescue the president's daughter or something. I wish I could remember the name of that.
Mission Impossible.
Huh?
Mission Impossible.
Mission Impossible. You have a possible mission, not an impossible mission. Because all I want you to do is reflect back now on the 5 problems. The problem with Erickson. Did the Son of God give up the use of some attributes? The problem with Hodge. Is Hodge an historian when he says that the Son of God as a man has a man's mind, a man's will, and experiences as a man, is an entity that acts? The problem of Buswell, who says, oh, no, the Son of God is not an entity. He's against Hodge. He wrote after Hodge. They're both Reformed theologians, which is curious, but that shows you that one can be a Bible-believing evangelical Chalcedonian and disagree miles and miles apart about Christ, which is amazing, but they do. And then the problem of God the Son knowing less than God the Father, because it says in John 5:19-20 that the Father showed him these things, and the Father will go on showing him greater things. So the Son's going to learn by being shown. Is that an eternal relationship or is that a temporal relationship? And the problem of Philippians 2:6. Does that mean that God the Son has morphe theou, but does not have isa theou? 12 types of sources, if you please. Where the rubber makes the road. This is the application.
Well, systematic theology.
Systematic theologies. Good. Systematic theologies. What's another?
Figures of speech?
Huh?
Figures of speech or idioms? I don't know.
A source? Well, E.W. Bollinger does have a book. He wrote a lexicon. He also wrote a book. He's a hyper-dyspe. That was one problem that I would suggest to you if we were doing on trinal relationships, because he says that if pneuma, spirit, is articulated, then that's the Holy Spirit. But if it's anarthros, without the article, if spirit doesn't have the article, then that's the power, not the person. That's an interesting thing to study. Now he would say that there are sometimes contextual clues that would lead even the anarthros pneuma, one to take even the anarthros pneuma to mean the person too. Okay, so systematic theologies. Figures of speech, I'm not sure whether there's a type of source. Huh?
It's not a source in and of itself.
Huh?
It's not a source in and of itself. You say figures of speech.
Yeah.
That's not a source.
That's right. It's an argument, maybe.
How about theological papers? Dissertations?
Papers. Now, here's the thing. You will find in our library, which you're going to discover tomorrow when I bring these books, master's theses from students of Western Seminary, because they had Rodmacher, and so they gave Dr. Rodmacher copies of their thesis. He was on their committee, apparently. I didn't have him. He left in 90 and I started in 90. So I didn't get to have him. So papers, and we're qualifying papers here, and Joe may not have meant that, but papers as master's theses or doc dissertations. You will find in our library several doctoral dissertations. If you ever want to look at one and see what a doctoral dissertation is. We have 2, I think, from Dallas Seminary. We even have there the 2-volume doctoral dissertation by Earl Rodmacher on the meaning of the church. We have another one that deals with Hebrews 6:4 by somebody. I
Kim
forget.
Oberholzer.
Huh?
Kim Oberholzer.
Yeah, good. And we have another one which is more in practical theology by some guy from UNISA, Southern African Public University. Then we have several master's theses. Also, Joe may have had in mind papers as in journals.
Yeah, that's what actually happened.
Right. And they are excellent. I was going to suggest to you for a research paper in Genesis through Song of Solomon, the question of how tall was Goliath? Because if you look at the Hebrew Masoretic text, and you know that we don't have any very early Hebrew copies, except for the Qumran discovery, you find 6 cubits and some change. So that puts him up around 9 feet tall. But somebody wrote an article in Jets, which you probably, if it was a current one, you could look at and get off the web, questioning that. Because the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, has 4 cubits and some change, which would put him around 6'9". Then the argument comes, but how could he be a mere 6'9" and carry such a weighty spear and carry such weighty armor? Because that must have been 100, because it gives how much they weighed, in the text. Because that weighs about 130 pounds. So the guy who's writing this research says, yeah, but the modern American soldier, when he goes into battle, frequently carries 125 pounds. My boy, just back in Iraq, 14 months. The one who almost shot me. I'm glad I'm around. So here, and by that he uses. Then he goes to the Qumran discovery, and curious enough, the Qumran, of course, it's not the complete scripture, but it supports more generally the Greek translation than the Masoretic text. So then he has other things that he reaches out for too. But that's an interesting question. That's a journal. And what you need to do, you can go to our library and get an index. So you get an index every year. We have Bibliotheca Sacra there, and we have Jets, and I think we have 1 or 2 others, portion of them. And if you're doing a paper on baptism, you get the index and you see who may have written a research paper, an article on baptism. So we have systematic theologies, we have master's theses, doctoral dissertations, papers, and journals. I could look at all of those in interacting with the problems in those 5 that I gave you. What else? Because we have 9 more.
Lexicons, you're going to do a Greek word study, more lexicon.
Good.
Original Greek text.
Excellent. We're going to go to lexicons. Did you say another one, or just lexicons?
Well, I want to read it in the Greek text.
Yeah, we want to look at the Greek text if we're dealing with a Greek article or problem, and the lexicons we would use. 8 more.
How about grammars?
We would look at grammars. We could check out grammars by, well, I gave you several grammars, Robertson or Dana and Manty on that articular infinitive, for example. What else?
I think historical theology would be.
Yeah, and I reference historical theology. There again, you want to go to the primary sources because that's not hard to do. You can frequently do it on the web, or you can go into our library, and let's say you're dealing with the issue of Philippians 2:6, just like I did. How do you think I knew what Augustine said, or Athanasius? By going to the book, not theirs because I have my own, and pulling it off and looking it up. What else? Commentaries, especially exegetical commentaries, very good. What else?
Your professor?
Yeah, you can get maybe class notes or just ask him. I had half a mind to call Doc Retland and say, well, do you agree with these other 2 Dallas guys or not about the function of the articular infinitive in Philippians 2:6? Class notes or just discussions with professors? What else? Okay.
You mean like ISD? Like ISD?
I'm sorry, Kirk, I can't hear you.
Encyclopedias?
Bible encyclopedias, like Kirk did or theological encyclopedias. Did a paper on baptism. You can go to the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, pull that off the shelf on baptism, and find 2 views, one from the sprinkler and one from the, and I think A.T. Robertson writes, in the old ISB, writes the view for Baptist, if I remember rightly. What else? See, you could go to that encyclopedia on the Incarnation, see what they say about that. Well, it's pretty good. You can go to creeds. One of the most excellent references is Schaff's Creeds of Christendom, 3 volumes. Some of those are in both the biblical language and English. So, for example, if you can read the Creed of Arius, the one who started Arianism. You can read his personal creed in Greek and English. You can read the Nicene Creed in Greek and English. So creeds, of course you don't have to believe what they say, but you can look at them. And also books on one subject. There are lots of books, and I've named a couple on the Incarnation, for example. A.B. Bruce, Humiliation of Christ. Martin Chemnitz, with a Z at the end, not Chemnith, on the 2 natures of Christ. Good book, but he's a Lutheran, so he believes in the mingling of the natures. Why do they do that, by the way? Why do they believe that? What doctrine is connected with that in ecclesiology? The belief, now they do not believe that the human nature supplies the divine nature with attributes, because they believe in the immutability of God too. What they believe is that the divine nature supplies the human nature. So the human nature is omnipresent. And what Lutheran dogma and ecclesiology does that connect to?
You know, I don't know how good a source this would be, but there are guys like William Ramey that have websites now
Yeah.
that have all kinds of helpful things.
Yeah, now one you might want to check out www.bible.org has some pretty heavy stuff in it. Go to Scholars or the Doc Soapbox. The doctrine, of course, is the doctrine of the Lord's Supper. Because you have three views on the Lord's Supper. You have the view that it's just a commemoration of the death of Christ. You have the view that the ingredients are transmuted into the body and blood of Christ, the Roman Catholic view. And you have the view of the Lutherans that the body and blood of Christ are in and around the actual elements. So the elements don't really change. But the body, really, the spiritual body and blood of Christ is there. How is it there? Because it's the humanity is omnipresent. How is the humanity omnipresent? Because the divine nature gives some of the divine attributes to the human nature. Lutheranism says. Oh, then also you can look at, did I already cover? Maybe I already covered it. I think you guys covered it. Okay, that's 12. No one here is taking it for credit, is that right? So I don't have to discuss the paper. Oh, you are? Okay. Excuse us for about 3 minutes. If you're taking it for credit, even if you're just kind of interested in seeing what the paper is, you can look at the second page of this handout. This is not real research. This is, however, reviewing literature, which is the first step, one of the first steps in research. And on page, it says page 2 or 3 at the top. It says 5, out-of-class assignment. And my opinion is that the student in a graduate school should expect to spend about 2.5 hours of out-of-class work for every hour in class. That's on the high side, because I personally know that some profs don't require that. But I mean, out-of-class assignment, do any 3. Now, I was going to have you do 4, all 4 of these, but you only have to do any 3. You choose. Write one research paper of 8 to 12 pages. Entitle it Practice in Theological Research. Really, it's not theological research because I'm not requiring you to interact. I'm only requiring you to find. You're only doing the first step, which is reviewing the literature. In this paper, answer these 4. Scratch 4 and say 3 of 4. Do any 3 of 4. 1. Does the usage of firstborn, remember that phrase is in Colossians, by the ante-Nicene, Nicene, and post-Nicene fathers, and I assume you know who they are. The Nicene Creed was first in 325, and then it was revised in 381, and that's the one you usually see. The ante-Nicene fathers would be those church fathers before that. The Nicene fathers, like Athanasius, would be those fathers, and post-Nicene fathers, like Augustine, would be fathers who followed that. So how would you find out what these fathers meant when they used prototokos, firstborn? You would open the book up, you would turn to the index, you would look for the phrase firstborn. Then you would turn to that page, and these are the collections of the fathers that we have in our library, or maybe on the web, I don't know. And you would write down how this guy used it, and how this guy used it, and how this guy used it. 5 of those you would document those according to the Chicago style, which by tomorrow I hope you'll know. You could do that problem. Number 2, do exegetes, lexicons, or systematic theologians concur with Fee in 1 Corinthians that in 11.3 the metaphorical usage of kephali is source of? Fee says it means source of, not authority over. Of course, it's used metaphorically because kephali literally means head. So, how would you do that? You would look at a systematic theologian like Grudem. You would find kephali. You would look what he says about that. Or you would go to a lexicon and look up kephali. Or an exegetical commentary like F.F. Bruce on 1 Corinthians in NICMT and see what Bruce says about it. Do they agree or do they not agree? Some may agree, some may not agree. You're only reviewing the literature. But you would have to use 5 footnotes using the style of Chicago style. Or you could do 3. Do 19th through 21st century theologians agree with Jacobus Arminius, my old pal, because we read every word of the 3 volumes in my MA in theology because it was at an Arminian school. What now is Point Loma Nazarene University is Pasadena College then. So we read everything with Arminius. Do they agree with Arminius in the divinity of the Son in the Disputation 5.4 that while the Father is autotheos, God from himself, the Son is not? See here, 3 gods almost, because the Son is God from the Father. And 4, do other exegetes, grammarians, lexicons, or theologians who address this precise issue agree with Morris and NICNT, who says in that book on John that, where is it? At John 5:26, since it uses the preposition para and not ek. And by the way, if you look at the Greek Orthodox Creed and the other ancient creeds, they substitute ek for para. But John has para. Do others agree with Morris that because John uses para, that refers to an economic or temporal sending of the Spirit and not an eternal? Because the Westminster Confession of Faith says it's an eternal one. All right, that's on the paper, and you can call me anytime and ask me about that. So are you Tim? Are you Tim then?
I'm Jared.
You're Jared. Jared, you can do any 3 of the 4. You'll have 15 footnotes because you're using 5 for each. You do not have to interact. You do not have to do the stuff that I've talked about here and say, why does he believe it and are his reasons good? All you have to do is say what they believe. What you are doing is 3 things. You're practicing literature review, which is a first step in research. That has to happen before you do the rest. You are practicing footnoting, and you are practicing bibliography. And also you need to practice the stuff that I talk about tomorrow, like English usage and argumentation and stuff like that, okay? All right, well, probably not argumentation because you're just finding out what they say. Okay, about 10 minutes, and when we're starting our stuff about the Chicago style. This is how you have to do it. In the layout, spacing and indentation, and all of these things I think on this page I'll repeat once or twice as we go through tomorrow. Headings between the margins, heading between the margins. If it's a first level heading, it goes between the margin. if it's a second level heading between the margin, or at the left. If it's a third level heading, it goes at the left of the margin. Double space the text. In my opinion, you should single space the footnote. You should justify the left margin, so the left margin is nice and straight, but do not justify the right margin. If you justify the right margin, you're going to have spaces, probably, where you don't want spaces. In the text, when you write a footnote, you have, and Guthrie said, da 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 da, in quote, footnote, or number in the text, 1, which refers to a footnote below the text. Do not have any space between the ending punctuation, the period or whatever, and the footnote. No space. In the text now I'm talking about. Not in the footnote, not in the bottom. Because there you do have one space between the number of your footnote and the first word of your footnote. Is that clear? In the text, when you're doing your discussion and so forth, you're going to have a number that, here, let me give you an example. Okay, this is your text. You do like that, period. Then you another sentence like that, period. Then you have a heavy line halfway across the page, which separates the text from the footnotes. The footnotes occur on the same page that the text references them. So if you have here, if this is a period, and you have the number of a footnote, there is no space between the ending punctuation and that number. But in the footnote, there is a space. The footnote should be superscripted, so it's halfway above. And there should be one space in the footnote. And I will exemplify that at least once, maybe twice, as we go on tomorrow. Indent your paragraphs 5 spaces. In the footnote, you indent the first line 8 spaces. So your number is going to be the 9th space from the margin. Subsequent lines go to the margin, which is 1.5 inches from the left. First line indented 8 spaces. Subsequent lines in the single footnote go from margin to margin. It's quite all right if you have a footnote at the bottom of a page and it goes beyond into the next page, that's okay. We'll talk more about that. Block quotes. If you are quoting 4 or more lines, direct quotes, that's called a block quotation. A block quotation, as long as you use one form consistently, you could either indent it 5 spaces or 10 spaces. One expositor of the Chicago style says 5, one says 10. I would do it 10. Block quotes should be single-spaced. They should not have quotation marks because the very format shows your reader that that's a block quote. If you are quoting and referencing, documenting that quote from the same source, you do not repeat the entire source in the bibliography. You go, let's see, hold on, you do it like this. This is your bibliography. Well, let me just wait, because I have that later, tomorrow on that. What I'm saying is, if you have the source of the book F.F. Bruce, 1 Corinthians, and then you have F.F. Bruce, Hebrews, like another commentary. Same author, different book. You rank them sequentially, the earliest first and the latest, later last, and you omit the name F.F. Bruce in your bibliography.
Earliest in your usage of them?
The date,
Or earliest?
okay, we have 1 Corinthians, let's say, 1975. In your bibliography, you cannot abbreviate anything. You give all the information in your bibliography that you're required to give. And part of that, of course, is the date of publication. F.F. Bruce, 1 Corinthians, comma, 1975. Then you have another source by Bruce. Hebrews, commentary on Hebrews, 1981. That comes second. And instead of putting F.F. Bruce again, you go, you use underscores. And you use 10 of those. Just like that. This illustrates that.
Are they underscores or periods?
My source says underscores, but when I believe I did periods. They're not like the lines, not the lines, the dots, whatever those are.
So they're not a series, I mean, they're not intermittent dots or intermittent lines.
Huh?
Are they intermittent lines or intermittent dots?
No, they're dots. 12 dots.
So they're not dashed.
Or 10 dots.
They don't, so it's exactly 10 dots, or they cover the same, like F.F. Bruce?
There you go. 10 times, dot, 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 dot.
Always 10.
Okay. Just about having to wind up.
Is this book says something different about quotes, it says longer than 5 lines.
Okay, that says 5, another says 4.
And it also says there should be double space.
I know. I think I had that in my paper, but maybe I didn't say it. Let's see if I did.
You said the longer ones, you should indent in single space, and that's the way I've always done it. But this says on page 9.
You are going to find that interpreters of the Chicago style differ. And I gave you an example where here Turabian says 8, but Slade says 5. And I'm not sure what SBL says. Go by SBL. Because not only do interpreters of Chicago style change, but even the school itself is mutable because formerly it was Slade and SBL, and now it's SBL. According to Dr. House, no longer are they using Slade too.
Well, where this really matters is if you're publishing, right? If you're turning in a manuscript for a book.
Well, it matters. It matters in your research papers too, Jack, and it matters a whole lot if you're doing a master's thesis or a dissertation. So, if an SBL says something different than I say, Greg, go with SBL. I think that page is done. More on block quotations, and we'll stop with this page. Block quotations, or maybe this is it. 4 or more lines, no quote marks, single space according to Turabian, double space according to Slade. Remember the copyright law. Basically, a copyright law is if you're quoting more than 150 words, or if what you quote is the entire part of a subsection of a book, you need to have the publisher's okay to do that. One might ask, what would be the purpose of having such a long quotation when you could put it in your own words? If I were you, I'd weigh heavily the virtue of making a lengthy quotation. Sometimes it's good. For example, if you're doing something on Karl Rahner, and Karl Rahner says that the economic trinity is the ontological trinity, but others say, no, he doesn't say that. You may want to quote him verbatim. But if you have on each page these lengthy block quotations, your prof might think all you're doing is stringing together the opining of your sources, and you don't want to give that impression. Actually, I think I'd better stop. You guys have been good about your 10 minutes, so we'll stop right here and take up 13 tomorrow.